One story that comes to mind is the story of the Dominican sisters in Iraq. Now, you all probably saw the huge onslaught as people fled ISIS in 2014 across the Nineveh Plains, huge flux of refugees, internally displaced persons, as people just got up with the clothes on their back and tried to get out of the way of violence. Among those people were the Dominican sisters, who had been disrupted previously and moved in prior periods of conflict from Baghdad to Mosul. They were in some Christian villages that they thought were safe, and they were not safe. And as they moved away that day, it was very, very hot, and they immediately, when they arrived in the nearby city of Erbil, a journey that usually takes a very short amount of time, it took like 18 hours, and people were collapsing in the heat. And the first things the sisters did, themselves displaced, was commandeered a tent and set up some mobile health clinics right away that day. And that kind of energy, that while you yourself are a victim of conflict, or you could be seen as a victim, or are fleeing conflict, or your lives are in danger, your instinct in your DNA is, how can I in this moment serve others? And to see them, what they did with that experience, they realized that quite quickly that they were not going to be able to go back, and that the school year was coming upon them. This was August. And they needed immediately to create schools for all the displaced people. So they started first trying to get any space they could in existing housing, and knowing that displacement could last 17 years and their people could be there a very long time, and there wasn't room in the existing public school districts, in the existing schools, they immediately started to build a school in the middle of a war zone. Now you could say, well, and I find that a lot of people do just kind of dismiss the work of women religious, like, oh, well, that's just what sisters do. They're nurses, they're teachers, so they kept doing the nursing and the teaching. And in that kind of dismissal, you miss a lot of the action and a lot of the depth of what was happening. So they were trying to protect particularly the girls from human trafficking, and they knew that they needed to be in school to be able to protect them from winding up in human trafficking. They also knew that this displacement would be very long, and they would need to be educated in other languages. These were some of the last people on the planet that speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. So they needed to learn Arabic, they needed to learn Kurdish because they found themselves in a Kurdish area, and they were also teaching English for those who would leave to other countries. And so they were doing all of this, but they were doing it as trauma healing. They were quite intentional, but they said we have to be able to return to regular patterns of life and to give our people hope that there is a future beyond this conflict. And in their schools, they set up a table, initially just a table that they called the peace table, because they said there was so much conflict that the students were acting out, the children were acting out. They were living in literally metal shipping containers, which they euphemistically called caravans. So they were crowded in these little tin cans. And obviously that brought a lot of conflict in the family and the community. And so they would set quiet, peaceful places that they could work out any conflicts in the students in the school. And then when they eventually built their school within a year, they had a beautiful prayer room, and they would use that as part of the curriculum as a way to process their trauma, to pray for their family and friends who had not fled, the elderly, the disabled who they had to leave behind, to pray for their homes, to just be able to engage their relationship with the Lord at a time when their churches were desecrated and burned back home. So the place that their churches had been a scene of violence, they wanted to recreate that resilience and that chance to continue to be their identity and their faith and feel safe in that identity when that identity had been literally what had targeted them. So they were baking peace building in to everything they did, very intentionally. And they were inclusive in these institutions, in the healthcare and the schools, to other ethnic and identity groups, other religious groups, while also trying to heal the wounds of their own community. And they're saying, we are laying the ground for reconciliation. It won't come now, it's too fresh. But by these interactions and these everyday interlocations, we are hoping to lay the groundwork for future reconciliation. Just a very long-term frame of mind. And the religious ideas that motivated that were fully integrated in every way. The religious institutions that they brought to that were fully utilized. So they were using their local institution, Caritas, CRS. They were engaging through Catholic universities. That's how I myself and my colleagues at Catholic University got involved in documenting the genocide and doing some basic human rights documentation that was able to prove to the external world this was in fact a genocide happening. But it was through their mobilization of the networks that they had at their hands that they were able to really use the resources of our church as a family. If a family member is in distress, how can we help? So it's really the things I talk about are the 3 I's, the institutions, ideas, and imagination. And they were using them in such creative and resilient ways to bring their religious ideas, their religious institutions, but also their imagination that they would not always be a people fleeing violence, and that one day they would live in greater peace, and they needed to prepare and work for that day, even while the violence was building around them.